I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 40 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting, again, is taking place in a hybrid format. There will be members that will be appearing via Zoom. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witness and members. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. For those participating virtually, please use the raised hand function. Before speaking, click on your microphone icon to activate your own mic. Those in the room, it will be controlled by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. You may speak in the official language of your choice. If there is a disruption in translation services interpretation, then I would ask you to get my attention. We'll suspend while it is being corrected. And I would also like to remind participants that screenshots are not allowed or permitted. And should any technical issues arise, as I indicated, we will spend for a few moments. Also at this time, I'm going to remind members and witnesses that are appearing virtually, if you do not have a House of Commons approved headset, I will not recognize you. And this is for the benefit of the translation interpretation services. You can participate in the vote by indicating hand up, but if you do not have a House of Commons approved headset and you are virtually witness or member of the committee, I will not recognize you. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, October the 19th, 2020, the committee will proceed to a technical briefing session on Bill C-22, an act to reduce poverty and support the financial security of persons with disabilities by establishing the Canada Disability Benefit and making a consequential amendment to the Income Tax Act. I would like to inform all members that the witnesses appearing virtually today have completed the technical test and their interpretation services has been checked and it is fine. I would like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussion with a technical briefing. It's up to 20 minutes, followed by questions. And I would indicate to the committee that following the 20-minute briefing, if it takes that long, it's max at 20. We will do a 1 6-minute round as we normally do, after which I will simply open the floor to any question by any member sitting here today. Simply get my attention rather than continuing to go from round to round, if that's agreeable to the committee members. From the Department of Employment and Social Development, Alexis Conrad, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Income Security and Social Development Branch and Policy Horizons Canada. Krista Wilcock, Director General, Office for Disability Issues. We will start with Mr. Conrad. Mr. Conrad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the committee for having us with you today. Comme vous le savez, peut-être.
As you are likely aware, earlier this year, the government once again presented the Canadian Disability Benefits Act, which is now known as C-22. I'm delighted to have your committee following this bill and pleased to have this opportunity to help the committee accomplish its work.
Walk through the legislation and then spend a couple of minutes and talk about some of the engagement that has been done leading to this point, in which case hopefully that will leave plenty of time for questions from members. As you know, Bill C-22 proposes a framework for the Canada Disabilities Benefit. If passed, the bill will provide the legal authority to design, administer, and implement a new Canada Disability Benefit. First, I would note that the legislation is framework legislation, meaning that most of the details of the benefit will follow in regulations. This approach is intentional. The aim is to strike a balance between getting a benefit in place to meet the immediate needs of working age persons with disabilities living in poverty, while at the same time, in the context of Nothing Without Us, having the time to engage with people with disabilities and the disability community to ensure their concerns are reflected in the design of the benefit. Given the complex system of benefits and supports for persons with disabilities in Canada, engaging provinces and territories and other stakeholders is critical to the benefit success. Using regulations for key benefit elements such as eligibility also recognizes that disability is an evolving social construct. This approach will allow for more flexibility as our understanding of disability evolves. And we have been very encouraged by the feedback we've received from the disabilities community and provinces and territories on this approach. The disabilities community considers this as strong evidence of nothing without us and a best practice. Provinces and territories note that rather than announcing the specifics of the benefit, working with them to see how a benefit would best mesh with their own programming helps them and helps persons with disabilities at the same time. Provinces and territories have also noted that by moving ahead quickly with C22, the Government of Canada is demonstrating that the benefit will actually happen and not simply something that will be planned for later. We're asking them to do a lot of analytical work, and this legislation is proof to them that it's needed. The purposes of the bill, as stated, are to reduce poverty and support the financial security of working-age persons with disabilities. The preamble situates this bill within the current framework of legal rights and protections of persons with disabilities in Canada, including the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Accessible Canada Act. It also acknowledges Canada's international obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In addition, the preamble recognizes that working-age persons with disabilities are more likely to live in poverty than their peers without disabilities, as a result of economic and social exclusion. The preamble also reiterates Canada's aspirations to be a global leader in poverty eradication, as stated within the Poverty Reduction Act, and demonstrated through Canada's existing supports to seniors and families with children. The bill would provide the Governor and Council with the legal authority to detail the design of the benefit through regulations. This includes its basic amount and how that amount would be reduced by other income, such as employment earnings, eligibility criteria for the benefit, the frequency of payments, applications and delivery mechanisms, and reviews and appeals. The approach of tabling framework legislation with details to follow in regulation will enable the government to continue to engage on these design elements of the proposed benefit. The rationale behind the approach is that the government will need to work with both persons with disabilities as well as provinces and territories on the benefit design. Canada's obligations under the UN Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Accessible Canada Act provide that the Government of Canada should engage with persons with disabilities on policy, program, and service delivery and design where it affects them. Through the approach being taken, the government will continue to engage with persons with disabilities through the regulatory process on the benefit design. In addition, engagement through the regulatory management process will allow for the ongoing involvement of persons with disabilities on the implementation of the regulations. Because provinces and territories play such a central role in providing support to many persons with disabilities, it is imperative that the Government of Canada collaborate with them to ensure that persons with disabilities are better off because of the introduction of this benefit and the potential negative interactions with the existing federal, provincial, and territorial measures are identified and addressed. A key component of the bill is Clause 12, which would require a parliamentary review of the Act and of its administration and operations. In other words, the implementation of the benefit. This review would take place 3 years after the coming into force of the Act and every 5 years thereafter. Finally, as the long title of this bill mentions, quote, making a consequential amendment to the Income Tax Act, quote, this amendment is to allow the sharing of taxpayer information from the Canada Revenue Agency to Employment and Social Development Canada for the purposes of administering the benefit, such as income information to determine the amount individuals would be entitled to. This is standard across most income benefits. And as with most legislation, the bill would come into force at a date set by the Governor and Council. Dans l'esprit de rien sans nous,
In the spirit of nothing without us, which requires that we include persons with disabilities in drawing up any programming that affects their lives, The Canada Benefits benefit that is now being put forward is based on ongoing engagement with the interested parties. Many engagement activities have taken place already. A survey, a consultation survey, carried out in May for the action plan as to how to include people with disabilities involving the Canada Disability Benefit took place between the 4th of June 2021 and the 30th of September 2022. 1,500 respondents at least have been involved.
The disabilities roundtables have been held, a roundtable with Minister Qualtrough, MP Ryan Turnbull, and disabilities organizations to launch an online survey in June 2021, a roundtable with the Prime Minister, Minister Qualtrough, and persons with disabilities later in June 2021, a roundtable with Minister Qualtrough and Disability Without Poverty in July 2021, and a roundtable with Minister Qualtrough and disabilities organizations in later July 2021. 4 other roundtables have been held. A roundtable with disability researchers and academics in January 2022, a roundtable with organizations who work with members of racialized communities, also in January 2022, a roundtable with national disabilities organizations in February 2022, and a roundtable with disability service providers later in February 2022. In addition, we have engaged with other organizations, such as those representing the private insurance sector, given the role in the broader income benefits landscape in Canada. Concurrently, community-led engagement efforts are underway to inform the Disabilities Inclusion Action Plan and the Canada Disabilities Benefit. Funding agreements are in place with national disability organizations to lead community-level engagement, and it is anticipated that community-level engagement currently underway could take place until spring 2023. Funding through ESCC engagement protocol agreements for national Indigenous organizations to provide community consultations is anticipated to continue until spring 2023. We are also engaging with the provinces and territories, given that they provide key benefits and programs to persons with disabilities. In summer 2021, federal, provincial, territorial ministers responsible for social services and disability met for an initial discussion on the proposed benefit. Bilateral and multilateral engagement with provinces and territories has been ongoing. It is expected that ministers will meet again soon, where the proposed benefits is expected to be a priority item. If and when Parliament passes Bill C-22, the Department has extensive plans to engage all stakeholders through the regulatory process to ensure their views are heard and factored into the draft and eventually final regulations. In fact, our ongoing engagement already underway is a key input into the regulatory process. Mr. Chair, I will stop there. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Conrad. That concludes the technical briefing, and as you can see, it was under the 20-minute allotted time. Before we begin the questioning round, I was remiss, I forgot to acknowledge we have a substitute member sitting in. Mr. McDonald is joining us today, and actually he told me he's going to rate me. He chairs the other committee I sit on, so I'm under some pressure today, committee members, with him present. So with that, as well, I'll deal with that a bit later. So as I indicated, unless somebody objects, we'll do a 6-minute round, and then we'll just go to opening questions from any member who wishes to direct a question. Simply get my attention. So we'll begin with, for 6 minutes, Ms. Gray. You have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for, excuse me, for the information here today. First of all, I wanted to ask, right now, federally, individuals who have the ability to apply for the disability tax credit, while this tax credit doesn't encapsulate all individuals with disabilities, has there been any conversation around having the tax credit and the Canada Disability Benefit approval go hand in hand to speed up the approval for the benefit when it's rolled out?
I'll start. I'll ask Ms. Wilcox if she wants to jump in as well. So we have been looking at every form of eligibility and assessing them. We've been talking to the disabilities community, provinces and territories, everyone about what the best approach is. And the question around the disabilities tax credit, which is an option, no decision has been made. That's something that is still under consideration. Depending on the approach taken, we will obviously look to see the easiest way for persons with disabilities to access the program, so that the service delivery aspects of this, of making it easy for people to receive the benefit, is critical regardless of which eligibility tool. If it's disabilities tax credit, then we will work with the Canada Revenue Agency, but that's still to be determined.
Okay, so that's something that you're looking at right now as a potential option, is what you're saying. Clause number 8.
Everything is on the table.
Okay. Clause 8 is regarding entering agreements on this benefit with provinces. How many provinces, equivalent departments, has your department reached out to so far regarding coordinating on this benefit?
We have spoken with all of them many times. We have ongoing officials tables that meet at a very frequent basis with all provinces and territories, all of which attend the meetings. The minister, the deputy minister, myself have worked closely with them, both in a multilateral form and a bilateral form. And in fact, they've been very encouraged by our efforts to work with them.
Thank you. Can you table for this committee, broken down by date and province, the meetings your department has had with each province's equivalent department or agency on the Canada Disability Benefit and its implementation? Is that something you'd be able to provide?
I think we can document, the efforts we've made. I'll have them sent to the committee after that works.
Great, thank you. Do you have an expected rollout or a target rollout for this benefit to be applicable?
So the legislation doesn't include a date. That's to be determined. There are a lot of processes still ongoing to refine the elements, to decide on the specific elements of the benefit and to implement it. I can say the minister is keen to move forward as quickly as possible. She's also keen to make sure we fully meet the needs of Nothing Without Us. We engage the community. We work with them through this process. We work with them through the regulatory process. So that does take time. So we're trying to strike the right balance.
Right. So do you have an estimate of any kind? Are you looking at 2 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year? Like, what you must be working backwards towards a particular timeline, so that people with disabilities have at least a general idea of when they should be expecting this.
So the challenge is that not having any sense of when Parliament will finish its consideration of the bill, we need to finish that process before we can actually do the regulatory process. And we have to figure out all of the engagement parts of the regulatory process. So I don't have a date to work back from, because I don't know the date that we'll be starting the next phase of the process.
So the next phase of the process that you're referring to then, once, assuming that if it's passed through Parliament, then what is the estimated timeline of the next phase to go through the regulatory process? How long are you expecting that to take? Or what's your best estimate that you're expecting?
So, a regulatory process like this, which is extremely complex, there are literally hundreds of elements of this, is going to take some time. We for notional kind of purposes, start to think about a 12-month-ish time period. That can be shorter, that can be longer. Also, depending on the complexity of the program, but also the level of engagement. But it is certainly a multi-month process to do regulations and then consult on the draft regulations and bring back the final regulations.
So as you've been working through this, because this was actually legislation that was worked on in the last Parliament and now has been brought forth, and as you mentioned, since May there's been a lot of engagement that you said out there getting feedback. So do you have some drafts already based on all of this work that you've done over this amount of time, or is that really all just starting after this potentially passes through Parliament?
Sorry, just to be sure I'm answering the right question, you're asking about drafts of the regulations?
Yes, exactly. Do you have some drafts already that you've been working with? As I said, this was already something that was worked on even in the last Parliament, and then there's been lots of engagement that you've said. So do you have some drafts already, or have those not even been started?
So we don't draft the regulations until Parliament has finished its consideration of the legislation. We are going through a very deliberative process on the engagement side, as you mentioned, and working also as a department in terms of making sense of it and trying to bring advice forward about what should be in the regulations. So the drafting process is a formal thing, which will kick off after the bill has been finished by Parliament.
So just to be clear, based on what you were saying, is you're anticipating that this could take up to, or your best estimate is a year after it passes through Parliament? Is that what?
So what I'm saying is when we formally start the regulatory process, notionally we start to think around that time frame. That there's a lot of considerations that have to go into that, including the level of engagement and the amount of time and the input we get from the disabilities community through that process, because the one thing we don't want to do is shortchange them. They are critical input to this, and we have to have significant conversations with the provinces and territories, and that does take time. So there are, to be honest, so many moving parts to this that all have to be stage managed very carefully. So while we're ambitious in terms of wanting to get the benefit brought forward, we have to make sure we do it right, and that will take some time.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Now to Mr. Van Bynen for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the time that you're taking to help us gain a better understanding of what's being proposed here today. A number of questions. The first one is, how do you anticipate that the Canada Disability Benefit will interact with the existing provincial and territorial disability benefits?
So the intent of the federal benefit is to be almost a supplement of a provincial benefit, is to sit with it, not replace it. In the same way, for example, the guaranteed income supplement works with the old age security system. We see this as a supplement, and so it will complement it and be harmonized with the provincial benefit.
Or that the benefit amount is consistent from coast to coast to coast.
So that's a question that the minister has to consider based on feedback. We know provincial programs differ. Most federal programs are the same across the country, but that is part of the conversation that we need to have, including how the benefit best will meet the needs of the various people. Krista, you have your hand up.
And have the provinces and the territories given any indication of their willingness to be partners in this scenario, and to what extent?
They have given enthusiastic willingness to be engaged in this. In fact, they have been enthusiastic both on the intent of the benefit, but also the approach we've taken, including the framework legislation. This is exactly what they think needs to be done, and exactly the process they feel needs to be conducted to get it right.
Okay, and as we're getting into the framework, a couple of items that have been raised with me in a meeting as just recent as today. There are some disabilities that are episodic, example, mental health, example, muscular sclerosis, and psoriatic arthritis. Is there any consideration given to providing disability support for these episodic disabilities?
Yeah, perhaps I can answer that one, just to say that, like, unlike other groups of people, like where we have benefits based on age or other status, with disability, it's quite unique in the sense that we have a very diverse population. Disabilities are different, so we have to think about, in terms of the eligibility criteria, that there's different approaches in terms of the duration of disability, and we see that in terms of how across the country different benefits range from like 3 months to permanent disabilities. So we have to take that into consideration. We have to look at considerations on eligibility criteria related to how Excuse me, sorry, I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm having a bit trouble speaking. And in terms of how we define that disability, so we do look at the fluctuating disabilities. We have different programs for that, and so we'll have to consider all of that in looking at how we would define this and how we bring that together in the eligibility criteria. And that will be, it's certainly something we've heard of from our consultations with the disability community on this benefit, that we want to try to reach the people that are living in poverty that have disabilities, and that ranges across all types of disability, all types of duration of disability, and those are the things we're trying to look at.
Will there be income testing for individuals and families who support persons with disabilities? And if so, how would we make sure that the Canada Disability Benefit avoids disincentivizing paid work?
Yeah, it's a really important question. It will be an income-tested benefit as a poverty reduction measure, and at least that's how we anticipate the eligibility criteria developing for this. And you've raised a really important point. We're developing this benefit on top of an incredibly complex system of benefits across the country, and that's including PT social assistance, it's including private disability insurance programs, it includes federal programs like programs for veterans and Canada Pension Disability. We have housing benefits that are outside of social assistance in provinces and territories. So we're layering this on, and when we're looking at this and the income testing, we really want to make sure that people are going to be better off at the end of the day. And we heard very clearly from the disability community that people with disabilities want to work. They're not always able to work and gainfully earn an income, and that the design of this benefit needs to really take into consideration the interactions with other programs, other benefits, and also look at making sure that we don't disincentivize work and looking at the effective marginal tax rates that will be in terms of how it will affect people in terms of dollar for dollar losing money at certain income thresholds. So that's a really complex piece of work that is going on, and trying to understand the various programs that exist in provinces and territories has really been fundamental to that. And that's been a lot of the work that we've done so far with provinces, is just really trying to understand how their income tested programs are currently designed and how this benefit will sit on top of them and potentially interact with them.
Your 6 minutes is gone. Madame Chabot, pour 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes, Madam. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Listen, I will briefly repeat what I said in the House, because I had, while studying this bill, to speak well of it, to approve the principle of setting up a Canada Disability Benefit for persons with disabilities. The problem, though, is that this is at least in part a blank page. We are about to adopt the principle of a bill, but much is being said about consultation. Much is being said about principles. Yes, this will be complementary to what takes place in the provinces. It will be set up for and also, of course, by persons with disabilities. But as a legislator, in fact, as legislators, we have before us here a bill that is, largely a blank page of regulations. One of the aims here is to reduce poverty. But we don't know what the amount is that will be used to do so. Based on what criteria can you tell us that this will lift persons with disabilities out of poverty? Will poverty be defined by the poverty line? Do you have any data? Economic indicators, indexes, income, poverty, what type of income, and so forth. Perhaps I can begin. We do have a good deal of information. There are databases regarding the income of Canadians, and we understand that persons with disabilities are in a difficult position. Their yearly income represents a real difficulty. So it's clear that there is a problem, and what the problem is clear. And that's across the land, throughout Canada. The aim is to work with the community of persons with disabilities to better understand what this benefit should be based on interactions with the communities rather than simply bringing down an act. End of story. So it's a different approach. I understand that it may seem quite different, but we feel that this is the best way to go about ensuring that this benefit will be the best benefit possible. Let me give you an example, though, a very practical example. In Quebec, this is going to be an improvement for all persons with disabilities. As of the 1st of January 2023, there will be a guaranteed basic income, which will be indexed for persons who are eligible for it, who are living, with great difficulties that prevent them from being employed, from taking work. So do you have studies, let's say, for each province and territory about the state of the situation in each of them, lined up against the programs available in those provinces and territories? This would help us better understand where we should head, what the right path through all this will be. I understand, of course, that the minister or the cabinet will be working with that sort of data, and could we have it?
I think if the question is that you would like to understand if we have data on provincial programs, or would you like data on around poverty across the country? The latter I can easily provide to you. In terms of, we have not done an assessment of provincial programs. That we do have a kind of work that we're doing with provinces and territories to understand their programs, but not like in an assessment way. So I can certainly provide the committee with some data on poverty across Canada and the situation. We can provide data on how provincial programs that exist for persons with disabilities, how the income support programs, how they stack up against the market basket measure across the country. So if that's the type of data that you're looking for, we could provide that to the committee to support your work.
Merci.
Thank you. Another question. Some have criticized this, some groups have, even though most groups do support this approach. It's a high percentage, but some reserves have been expressed by certain groups regarding the length of time it will take for this new benefit to be rolled out. So is it true to say that we're not sure when it will appear on the horizon? You've got this principle. We say that the need is real. It's present now. Will these consultations take 3 years? More than 3 years?
I don't want to do is put a time limit or specify an exact time of how long it's going to take to fully engage the disabilities community. We're doing that already, and as we talked about, this is an incredibly complex environment to deliver a new benefit in. I'm fully cognizant the disabilities community would like this benefit to start now because the need is there. In fact, that's why the government is actually moving forward with the benefit in the first place. but our biggest fear is doing it wrong, to be honest. The interactions that my colleague talked about with other federal, provincial, private programs, the linkages. The last thing we want to do is move to a model where people end up accidentally being hurt and have other benefits cut off or declined. And that's why it's so critical that we do this right. We do it right both from a process point of view, but also from all of the variables. I will absolutely tell the committee I would love this benefit to start tomorrow, but it is so complex that it takes the time to get it right. But we are moving absolutely as quickly as we can, and the minister is fully committed to moving as quickly as you can. But I can't stress enough how complex it is and how important it is we do it right.
Merci, Madame Chabot.
Thank you, Ms. Chabot.
Zerillo for.
Ms. Cirillo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the technical staff to come and share with us today. I know that there's actually, quite a large piece of the disability community that's watching this today. They're interested in these answers around when it's going to come, how much is it going to be, who's going to get it. And there was some talk today about how much consultation has already gone on. And so my question is just around what studies have already been done, what findings are available for us as the committee to look at. So first of all, about the estimate of how many people would be covered and be eligible for this benefit. Have there been studies on this? Are there findings, and could you share them with the committee?
Sorry, I just missed my mute button there. In terms of studies on what I can say is that there are 6.2 million Canadians with disabilities across the country. There are about 4 million working age persons with disabilities in Canada. That's between 18 and 64. And there are about 917,000 working age persons with disabilities living in poverty in Canada in 2017. So we can provide the statistics that we have on those in terms of whether or not they would be all eligible for this benefit. That would be determined by the eligibility criteria that would be set out into the in the regulations. This is a really challenging population to get at, as we talked about already. Defining disability and how you look at it is a critical piece of this. In terms of what we know about people living with poverty, we know that with severity of disability, the risk of living in poverty and the risk of living in deep poverty goes up tremendously. So we will want to take that into consideration in designing a benefit to best target this population. We know that people with disabilities that are living in poverty have various sources of income. So not just social assistance, they have federal income supports, they have support from private insurance. And we know there's about 10% of the population with no source of income of people with disabilities. So I think it's really critical for us to be able to understand that population, how best to target this benefit to make sure that it's getting at that population of persons with disabilities. And as I mentioned before, I'm happy to share the diagnostic information that we have on persons with disabilities with the committee.
Thank you. And definitely I'd like to see that diagnostic, but you said a number of things that are very important. So has there been analysis? Has there been a deep dive analysis around eligibility? Maybe there's a phased approach. Like, there has to have been in the last 7 years some conversation around what this should look like. So I'm really trying to get an understanding of what is the will behind this bill. Even in the preamble, it talks about reducing poverty, but I'm trying to get an understanding of what is the will of the bill, because I think there's, many people that this is very important to them and they need to understand, are they going to be eligible? Is this going to come to them? So I'm looking for a little bit deeper around how much studying, how many findings, what kind of reports are available on what this could look like. I have to believe there is some additional information other than the top line data that can come out of StatsCan.
So yeah, there are other sources of information, and I mentioned in the beginning, one of the things we've been doing is working with the disabilities community, for them to help us understand this issue rather than tell them what's right for them. We want them to tell us what they think is going to work best for the community. There's groups like Disabilities Without Poverty who are doing a lot of analysis. They share it with us. We do a lot of analysis, as my colleague talked about, looking at how people interact with the market basket measure. We're working closely with provinces to understand how their programming works. It's an unbelievable amount of analysis, and the goal really is to change the lives of the disability community in Canada, who live in poverty in such larger numbers than the rest of the population, and need the support. So I can't tell you who's going to be eligible. I can't tell you how much, but I can tell you that we're going through a very deliberate, detailed process to understand how this should work best so it can benefit people.
And just on that, so what does that timeline look like? I'll ask again. Is it going to be more than a year before people are going to see this in their bank accounts?
So as I said, I can't speculate on, and to be honest, I can't speculate on how long Parliament will consider the bill for. And once the bill moves through Parliament, which is why we're obviously hoping it moves quickly, then we can move ahead with the next phases of it. And once we have the benefit design, then we've got to design the implementation and do the regulations. We're doing as much of this stuff in parallel as possible, but it is very, very hard, detailed, complex work. And I honestly wish I could just tell you, this is the date that the benefit's going to launch, but I'm a hostage to other processes, and our ambition is to get through it as quickly as possible because we know what the need is, but I can't honestly give you a timeline.
Thank you for that. And I guess one of the concerns that I have as a legislator is, I want it to be the best that it can be. And it seems like we don't have answers to what that best is going to be. There isn't even a commitment in the bill to reduce poverty, to eliminate poverty. I don't think there's anything in the bill that talks specifically about the Poverty Reduction Act, any tie to it. So I'm really...
I have to interrupt
ahead.
for a moment. The bells are ringing for a vote in House of Commons. I need unanimous consent to proceed. We have unanimous consent to proceed, and we will suspend with 5 minutes to go, if that's okay, if members are agreeable to use the voting app from here. I need direction from the committee. Do we have unanimous consent to continue? It's a 30-minute vote call. Yes? As long as we suspend. Oh yes. Yes, we'll suspend in time to allow everybody to participate by voting app. Is that agreeable? Okay, so I see unanimous. Okay, thank you. Madame Zerillo, your time is up. Would you wrap up your question, and we'll give time for a short answer.
Thank you so much. So what data is available to this committee that can help us to understand eligibility, timelines, and amounts? What is available?
So I don't have time to give you a list of all of the pieces we're looking at. We've had some requests already from the committee, which will provide that kind of data. If there are specific requests, then we'll do everything we can to provide to the committee, because we do think it's important that you have the most information possible to advance the bill. Sorry. I know that's a difficult answer, but that's. If there are things that you specifically need, then we'll look inside and see, do we have it? And if so, we'll happily provide it to the committee.
Red and Madame Zerillo, I'm going to follow the process that we had, which will take me to Ms. Falk for 5 minutes. Then I'll go to Mr. Long because I'm going to the questioning process. We have 15 minutes left. That will take me to that. Mr. Morris, you're not a member of the committee, so I cannot recognize you. But Madame Falk, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just so I can recap here, what I heard was there was no assessment done on the provincial programs. Is that correct?
No, in fact, we're working very closely with the provinces.
Oh, I
Sorry,
thought,
Chris, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, maybe I can just clarify. We would never assess a provincial program, like that's a provincial responsibility. So in the sense of assessing, like the impact of those programs, we've looked at them. It's an information sharing at this point in terms of gathering the information about the programs.
Thank you. In my opinion, and maybe it's just myself, but I definitely like to do my homework beforehand so I know what needs to be done and what boxes need to be checked to make sure that when we get to the next phase, we can check those boxes off. I was a part of this committee in the 42nd Parliament when this particular committee studied C81, which was the Accessibility Act, and we had repeatedly heard from stakeholders at the time that they wanted things placed in the legislation versus the regulations because they wanted stability and they wanted predictability. So what I've heard and what has been said is that the benefit amount and eligibility for this program are not included in the legislation as drafted. So my question is, why was it decided to exclude the basic and integral information to this program from the scrutiny of Parliament?
So I'll give you a sense of the logic behind building on what I said in the beginning in terms of the framework legislation. It not only is an opportunity to make sure that the voices of the disability community are part of the conversation to feed into the program design, but we also know that the nature of disabilities programming across the country, my colleague talked about this, is dynamic. It changes frequently. There are changes made by provinces, there's jurisprudence, there are changes, and the regulatory process is much more flexible in terms of making sure that the benefit design keeps up with making sure it's still meeting its policy objective. So there are some people may have mentioned through the Accessible Canada Act consultations they would like the details in the legislation. The feedback we have gotten from the disabilities community through the engagement we've done is that they prefer this, they like this approach because they feel more of a part of it, but also because it is a more flexible, dynamic process.
Thanks.
To keep pace.
Is that on the same vein of the provinces and territories? Have they said the same thing, that they'd like to see that in the regulations versus the legislation?
So provinces have consistently told us that they like the framework legislation approach because rather than us presenting them with what it's going to look like and having them have to figure out what to do about it, they're involved in the conversation at the beginning. So every conversation we have with the provinces has told us that they like the approach and they feel engaged. And given the importance of making sure that the provincial benefits and the federal benefit harmonize and always help persons with disabilities, that level of support from provinces is key to making this a success.
So in my province of Saskatchewan, people with significant and enduring disabilities, they have access to the Saskatchewan Assured Income for Disability, which is called SED. And benefits, and we do know that benefits do vary from province to province. So I'm just wondering, how is this new benefit going to interact with the existing benefits? And will provincial benefits be clawed back as a result of this benefit? And if you don't have the answer for that, has there been inquiry with the provinces and the territories if this is going to happen?
Yeah, I think that it's a really important question, and it's kind of fundamental to what we've been doing with provinces and territories. Minister Qualtrough has been clear in her messaging publicly and with provinces and territories that this is not a transfer to provinces and territories. We need to make sure that people are better off as a result of this new this new benefit, which is meant to supplement existing sources of income for persons with disabilities, as it says in the bill. So we have the work that we've been doing with provinces and territories to date is to really understand the complex web of programs, because you mentioned one, which is an income support program. But within Saskatchewan, there's also many other programs that rely on income tests for disability supports
For sure,
that
yeah.
people could inadvertently be cut off of. And that's really what we're trying to do, and trying a part of the process in terms of using framework legislation so that we can ensure that before everything is finalized.
I just really want to throw my voice
understand.
behind consultation. That consultation needs to be done with the provinces. We've seen over and over this Liberal government railroad through provinces and force what they want onto the provinces. And not all provinces are the same. And we have regional differences. It's just different from province to province. So I sure hope that the consultation has been done with the provinces and the territories, because this is for the benefit of the people that have disabilities. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Long for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you to our witnesses, and thanks for your work on this. My questions are along the same line as MP Falk. I will say, just for the record, I'm glad that we forced some provinces along on things like daycare, Premier Kennedy and Premier Ford. I'm glad that we brought them along to accept the daycare programs that are benefiting all of our constituents around the table. But along the lines of MP Falk, one of the concerns that a lot of my constituents have that, come into the office and talk to me about this is how will it look? How will it intertwine with the provinces? We've all, Premier Higgs is going to cut some of our benefit. And do you envision this like my colleague MP Falk was saying, as a province by province negotiation? Will it look different? Do you expect it to look different province by province? Like, for example, our housing benefit is different one province than the other. I know we had, obviously, the negotiations with the child care. So how do you envision that's going to look rolling out?
So I'll start. To go back to the question of engagement with provinces, yes, this is absolutely fundamental to this process, and that's the journey we're on, both at all levels and both collectively with the provinces, so they're all hearing the same thing, but bilaterally with them, so they can understand the specifics of how it fits with them. As we know, the provincial programs differ so much. There's different elements of them. There's different eligibility. There's different interaction with other programs, and so by sitting down with them and walking through it, one of the processes that they're going through is understanding all of the links with their own system. So on the provincial side, they will try to make sure that they understand when a federal benefit comes in, that they don't accidentally disqualify someone or reduce the income they're getting from another program. So that's the spirit that we've been working with them on an analytical basis to understand all those links.
Okay.
And that, to be honest, part of that is why it is so complex, because it is a very difficult and very differentiated landscape across the country.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll yield what's left of my time to MP Morris. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Chair, how much time is remaining?
20 seconds.
Will there also be an open round, as was mentioned at the beginning?
Depends how our time gets.
Okay, so I'll get started. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For me, my questions are about the urgency of this benefit and ensuring that the disability community is actively heard from throughout, in particular because there is limited or no support in Parliament for an emergency disability benefit. And so, Mr. Conrad, I appreciated you mentioned urgency in some of your remarks earlier. You also had mentioned a number of roundtables that have been held since June of 2021, which is good to hear. But what's also true is that the language of the bill is the exact same as what we had in June of 2021. And so I'd like to understand better what you heard at those roundtables, and why is it that, did you not hear anything that merited inclusion, or why is it that despite all that consultation, the bill is the exact same?
Thanks for that question. And so there's two pieces to the answer, and I can give you a sense of what we've heard so far, but just to remind the committee in terms of what Mr. Conrad mentioned in terms of what's going on right now. We did hold roundtables, but there is also a really important engagement process of persons with disabilities that's happening that we've provided funding for through the department, and we're receiving right now over the next months the results of that engagement process. So I can give you a sense of what we've heard so far. We've heard so this is just a summary in terms of both from roundtables and in terms of what we've heard from the funded projects. We've heard about the despair that people with disabilities have in living with poverty, that it's really that the CDB has the potential to transform their lives and enable them to live with dignity, choice, and freedom, that people are having to make tough choices between their basic needs and necessities, such as buying groceries or paying their rent. They're living in unsafe conditions. They're taking expired medications. We've heard that intersectionality impacts disability experience and accessing government programs, that marginalized populations face systemic racism. They have a discomfort or mistrust of government authorities, and that there's medical racism and misdiagnosis in the system. We've heard that they struggle with the costs associated with having a disability, including out-of-pocket expenses. They want the CDB, the benefit, to be equivalent to the amount of CERB. They don't want it to reduce other benefits. They're concerned about the marriage penalty and would prefer to have the income tested individually. They want to move away from the medical model of disability. They want to avoid creating new systems or adding complexity to existing systems and try to find a way to make this an automatic payment for persons with disabilities. They don't want to have an employment test. They want to have little, if any, asset testing. They want to fund community organizations that could support persons with disabilities in navigating the complex system of benefits for persons with disabilities, to address some of the psychological barriers that people with disabilities face in applying for new benefits that could be created by this new benefit. They don't want to have clawbacks of their existing benefits, and they want to have generous earnings exemptions so that people with disabilities can continue to earn income in the labor market. Those are some of the top
Thank you, Mr.
messages.
Morris. Now, Madame Chabot, pour 2 minutes.
2.5 minutes, Ms. Chabot. Myself? Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. I have a question about Section 3. The aim of this bill is to reduce poverty and to support the financial security of persons with disability who are of working age. So, in the groups of persons with disabilities whom we have had a chance to speak with, there are many questions were put, and I'd like to know what you mean by working age. Some tell us that at present there are people of 65, 66, 67 years of age who can feel that they're still able to work. So it seems unclear as a term. Do you have a clear definition of it? And then Section 4. People who meet the disability criteria laid out in the legislation may benefit, but we don't necessarily have any accessibility criteria yet, really, without the regulations. So how could we get clearer indications? Even I do understand, even if you do go about consulting, are you consulting just walking in with any things on the table, or do you walk in with some levels of minimum revenue? Do you already have a definition of what working age means? Do you already have a possible list of criteria so that people can, start the discussion based on something you present?
Question, thank you. So So in terms of the approach, maybe working backwards in terms of the approach to the engagement that we've done so far, we've done it thematically and we've asked questions to provide the community with the opportunity to give us their perspective. As we get into the regulatory process, and we will provide more detailed information that will enable us to engage more specifically on proposals for the regulations. In terms of working age, you're right, it does not define it in the legislation. The intent in terms of trying to target this population is that there are benefits for children up to 18 in Canada through the Canada Child Benefit and through the Child Disability Benefit. And there are benefits for seniors over the age of 65. And so the gap that we are trying to fill is in that population age group in between, that where there are currently no federal benefits that are specifically targeted to that population, unless you've been in the workforce for programs such as Canada Pension Disability or EI sickness, for example.
Thank you, Ms. Wilcox. Merci, Madame Chabot. Madame.
And thank you, Ms. Chabot. Ms. Zerbillo.
Well, I've just got so many more questions. I was really hoping to get some confidence in today's messaging, and I guess I'm just going to follow up what Madame Chabot just said around. There was just some testimony that this is going to fill the gap, and I was looking at census data today just around immigration and poverty levels for immigrant children, and it was high. So I'm getting input every day from folks that are making this decision between eating more than one meal a day or taking their medication. Like it's frustrating to have a meeting like this and not get any more information. So I guess my question is just about this lack of urgency, and how are we going to deliver support to people before the 3-year window, the 2-year window, the 1-year window? We don't even have an answer on how soon this is going to get rolled out. So I'm looking for some sort of confidence that we're going to be supporting people in their worst times right now, because I don't want to lose another person to MAID. I don't want another child to go hungry or another mother. So if you could just give us some idea how you're going to solve that in an urgent manner.
So I can't comment on other government programs that are ongoing. I mean, I obviously follow what's going on in terms of affordability programs that have been put forward. I will say that nothing about what we've said should suggest a lack of urgency. The persons with disabilities have been in the most precarious situation for far too long in Canada, and the whole purpose of this benefit is to fix that. So there is a heightened sense of urgency, which is why the government is doing this. What I've tried to do is just lay out a little bit the steps we need to take and why we're doing it, so we get it right. Because as I said, the last thing anyone wants to do is accidentally do harm to people. And in this kind of environment, if we do it wrong, we can have unintended consequences, and that puts people, either gets them no further ahead or puts them behind where they were, and that is something that I don't think any of us want.
Do I still have time, Mr. Chair?
That concludes your 2.5 minutes. It also concludes the first round and the first hour that this session was scheduled for. So as per the agreement, I now have to suspend. Mr. Morris, you...
Just a brief question to you, Chair. As I'm not a member of the committee, do I need consent from the committee to receive the documents that were promised to various members? And if so, can that be asked? We heard a commitment about the engagement with provinces and territories, for example.
Well, just for clarification, then I'm unsure, but I'm sure is the committee agreeable that whatever documents that are provided to the committee can be provided to Mr. Morris?
Yes.
I mean, they're public.
We're fine.
Okay.
We're fine.
I don't see anybody objecting, so Mr. Morris, yes. Whatever documents are provided to committee
Sorry,
from the
Mr.
officials will...
Mr. Chair, clarification? Sorry, were you referring to like the public documents? So these are documents that would be in the public, or are these documents that would be coming to committee members themselves? Are these public documents? Is that what you're referring to?
They'd be the documents, any documents that was asked for, and that would be provided to the committee.
So those would be the table documents that would be provided only to the committee. So therefore, I mean, from a process standpoint, those should be for committee members only, and it's nothing to do with the question, but I thought the member was referring to what was coming in from stakeholders, not the table documents that were.
Well, we have to get unanimous consent. I do not see unanimous consent, and I do have to suspend as to the agreement at this time, so I'm going to suspend the meeting for voting purposes as agreed to. I did not see unanimous consent, Mr. Morris. Thank you. Meeting.